Jean Calvin was born on July 10, 1509, in Noyon, France, into a devout Catholic family. His father, Gérard Calvin, was a notary and administrative officer for the local cathedral chapter, which provided young Jean with early exposure to the church. Originally destined for the priesthood, Calvin received a church benefice that supported his education. He studied Latin and classical literature in Paris at the Collège de la Marche and later at the Collège de Montaigu, where he was introduced to scholastic theology. However, his father, embroiled in disputes with church authorities, redirected Calvin toward law. Calvin pursued legal studies at Orléans and Bourges, where he was influenced by humanist scholars, particularly Erasmus and Jacques Lefèvre d'Étaples. During this time, he mastered Greek and Hebrew, essential for biblical exegesis, and developed an appreciation for Renaissance humanism. Although he initially conformed to Catholic doctrine, he gradually encountered Protestant ideas, which began to shape his thinking. By the early 1530s, he had begun questioning traditional Catholic teachings, setting the stage for his eventual break with the Church. Around 1533, Jean Calvin experienced a profound religious transformation that led him to break with the Catholic Church. The turning point may have been his association with Nicolas Cop, the rector of the University of Paris, who delivered a speech influenced by Lutheran ideas. When authorities cracked down on suspected heretics, Calvin fled Paris to avoid arrest, marking the beginning of his life as a religious exile. During this period, he deepened his engagement with Protestant thought, studying the works of Martin, Luther, and other reformers. He traveled through France, Switzerland, and possibly Italy, refining his theological views and distancing himself from Catholic doctrine. By 1535, he had settled in Basel, a refuge for Protestant thinkers, where he wrote the first edition of Institutes of the Christian Religion, 1536, a systematic defense of Reformed theology. This work established him as a major voice of the Protestant Reformation and set forth key doctrines such as predestination and justification by faith alone. By the time of its publication, Calvin had fully committed to the Protestant cause, abandoning any remaining ties to the Catholic Church and preparing for his future role as a reformer. In 1536, Jean Calvin arrived in Geneva, intending only to pass through, but he was persuaded by the fiery preacher Guillaume Farel to stay and assist in the city's religious reform. Farel, recognizing Calvin's theological brilliance, insisted that he had a duty to help establish Protestantism in Geneva, and Calvin reluctantly agreed. Together, they sought to implement a strict moral and religious code, emphasizing discipline, church governance, and doctrinal purity. However, their rigid approach and insistence on excommunicating those who defied church teachings led to significant opposition from powerful factions within the city. The refusal of Calvin and Farel to administer communion to those they deemed unworthy sparked outrage, particularly among the city's magistrates who saw their authority being challenged. The tensions culminated in April 1538, when the city council expelled both Calvin and Farel from Geneva. Calvin left for Strasbourg, uncertain about his future, but determined to continue his work in shaping Protestant thought. Though his first stay in Geneva ended in failure, the experience would prove foundational for his later return and lasting influence over the city. After his expulsion from Geneva in 1538, Jean Calvin moved to Strasbourg, where he found refuge among fellow Protestant reformers. Welcomed by Martin Bucer, he became the pastor of a French-speaking refugee congregation, gaining valuable experience in church leadership. During this period, he refined his theological ideas, emphasizing church discipline, liturgical practices, and the role of civil authority in religious matters. He also expanded and revised his Institutes of the Christian Religion, making it more comprehensive and structured. His time in Strasbourg was personally significant as well, as he married Idelette de Bure, a widow with children, in 1540. Meanwhile, Geneva struggled without his leadership, facing internal divisions and external threats from Catholic forces. As tensions in the city grew, Geneva's authorities began to reconsider their decision to expel him. In 1541, after much persuasion, Calvin agreed to return, determined to impose a more structured and disciplined religious order. His years in Strasbourg had not only strengthened his theological vision, but also prepared him for the formidable task of transforming Geneva into a model Protestant city. In 1541, after persistent requests from Geneva's authorities, Jean Calvin returned to the city, determined to establish a stable and disciplined Protestant community. He immediately set about implementing his vision, drafting the ecclesiastical ordinances, which outlined church governance, moral discipline, and social order. These ordinances established a strict hierarchy within the church, giving the consistory, AI, council of pastors and elders, the power to enforce religious and moral laws. Under Calvin's leadership, Geneva became a theocratic state where church and civil authorities worked closely to regulate both doctrine and daily life. Attendance at church services was mandatory, and moral offenses such as blasphemy, adultery, and gambling were severely punished. Calvin's reforms faced resistance from various factions, including the libertines, who opposed his rigid control. However, he gradually consolidated power, particularly after the execution of Michael Servetus in 1553 for heresy, which sent a clear message about the consequences of defying Calvin's authority. By 1555, his rule was firmly established, and Geneva became a model Protestant city, attracting reformers from across Europe. This period marked the height of Calvin's influence, shaping not only Geneva's religious landscape, but also the broader Reformation movement. By 1555, Jean Calvin had secured his authority in Geneva, transforming it into a center of Protestantism. With his theological and political leadership unchallenged, he focused on consolidating his reforms, refining church governance, and strengthening the city's role as a refuge for persecuted Protestants. His influence extended beyond Geneva, as his writings and teachings spread throughout Europe, shaping the development of Reformed churches in France, Scotland, the Netherlands, and beyond. Despite suffering from various ailments, including tuberculosis, Calvin continued to preach, write, and mentor the next generation of reformers. He expanded his Institutes of the Christian Religion into its final form in 1559, making it one of the most comprehensive theological works of the Reformation. His emphasis on predestination, church discipline, and the sovereignty of God became defining elements of Calvinist thought. As his health declined, he remained committed to his work, dictating letters and sermons even from his sickbed. He died on May 27, 1564 in Geneva, leaving behind a city transformed by his vision and a religious movement that would shape Protestantism for centuries. His legacy endured through the spread of Calvinism, influencing political and religious developments far beyond his lifetime.